Hey guys, welcome back to another episode in the Python series. In this video I'll be showing you lists. So what are lists in Python? So a list in Python is a way to store multiple values together in a single variable. You could otherwise describe it as a collection of values, all right? Oops. So let's say that you want to store a bunch of names in your program, okay? So what you could do at this current moment with your current knowledge is have multiple variables. So we can have name1 is equal to Bob. You could have name2 is equal to Randy. You could have name3 is equal to Billy, Joel. Anything you want, right? But that's kind of tedious, right? You have to create a new variable in your computer's memory for each name, which is kind of crazy. So a different way you could do it is with a list. So let's say that we want to have a variable called my favorite names. And if we want to make this variable a list, we can just put these brackets here. So a bracket, and then in the brackets, we can put the values that we want to store within the list, all right? So we can initialize the list with different values if you want to, all right? So Randy, and then if you want to have another value in your list, you separate it with a comma. So Randy, Billy, and then another comma if you want to add another one, Bob, and then we'll have one more, Billy Bob. And you don't need a comma on the end because you don't have another elements as they're called. So these are called elements. Each individual value here are called elements, all right? And we can really store any type of data type that we've learned so far within our list if we want to. So random numbers, we could do a list of numbers if we want to. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So that's pretty cool, right? So essentially you have a single variable with the values of multiple variables within it, if you really want to think about it that way. So not only does it save you time, it also saves you space in your programs, so you don't have to, keep writing a new variable for every value that you want to store. So in your program, if you have a bunch of like things, you don't have to create a new variable for it every time. You can store it into a list that has all of those values within it, all right? So another example I want to give you is that you can store mixed types within your list. So if you want to have a list, it doesn't have to all be the same data type, so strings or integers, for example. It can be whatever you want, really. So we can have Randy, we can have 1.0, we can have 1, we could have 2, we could have 3, we could have 2 again, we could have Bob. You can do whatever you want, really. In your list, you can store all of that information. And you can even do an empty list if you want to. So empty list is equal to, and then you just put empty brackets here, nothing inside of the brackets. And now you have a list in Python that is empty. And the reason you may want to do that, sometimes you're going to have, a need for a list, right? But you don't have the data yet. So let's say you have a program where you want to ask for a bunch of names and then store them. When the program starts up, you don't know what the names are, right? Because the user hasn't given them to you yet. So you may want to just initialize a list, right? Like we did here, and then ask for each name. And then as you get each name, store them into the list one by one, all right? And I'll show you how to do that in a second, actually, how to store stuff in your lists. Because these lists here are really cool, right? But you can't modify them with our current knowledge. So I'll be showing you a bunch of different list operations or functions you can do upon these lists to modify them, to add stuff, remove stuff, clear them, access them, all that fun stuff, okay? Now, if you want to see what's inside of your list as your program is running, like I said, a reason you may want to do this is because you may not know what's inside of your list, because you may initialize an empty list, for example, or you may have a list that's initialized, but you may add or remove stuff from it as the program progresses. So sometimes you may want to visualize the contents of your list to see what's inside of it, right? At the end of the day, these are just still normal variables, except that the data type is really just like a list this time. So you can print out these variables and they will give you what's inside of the list. All right, so now let's run this. Oh, we need to do this. Boom. So now we get all of these lists here. So this is the random names list, this is the mixed types list, this is the random numbers list, and this is the empty list. So let's go ahead and see how we can access values from a list, because there's really no point in storing stuff in a variable or a list, for example, if you can't access it, right? What's the point? So if you want to access, for example, this first element in this list here, the first value in this list, we can do my favorite names, which is the variable name or the list name, and then you do brackets, and then in these brackets here, you put the index or the position of the element that you're trying to access, okay? So if you want to access the first one, it's not actually 1, it's 0. Because in programming, when you have a list or what's called an array in other programming languages, it always will start at 0. That's called 0 based, all right? So 0 based. And this is another one of those deeper computer science things that you may see later on if you take a computer science course or if you're majoring as computer science in college. So this is a very common theme that you'll see in lots of places, okay? So you're probably going to mess up a few times along the way. You may forget that it starts with 0, but just get it in your head that whenever you access a list in Python, that it always starts at 0, okay? If you want to access the first one. So if you want to access the second one, it's going to be 1. And if you want to access the third one, it's going to be 2. All right. So let's just go ahead and print these out. So print my favorite names. We'll print out, let's say I'm going to print out the third one. So that'll be 2. So what this should do is essentially access this list here and the second index or the third value and then print it out. There you go. So we get Bob, which is the third one. Perfect. So let's print out some of the other ones. So print my favorite names 0. Prints my favorite names 1, and then print the last one, my favorite names 3, and then run this, and we get Randy, Billy, Bob, and Billy Bob. So these are known as its index or its position in the list, okay? So whenever you're talking about accessing a value from a list, you're going to be talking about what index it is at or what position, okay? All right, so let's say, for example, that you forget that it's 0 based and you put, print my favorite name is 4 because you're trying to access the fourth element. You're going to get an error. So if we run this, we get traceback, most recent call last, the file that we're trying to run, so list.py. And then it tells you where the error occurred, so line 7, which is actually very helpful. And then it says print my favorite names 4. And then the error itself, the name of the error is called index error. And it says list index out of range, which is actually very descriptive. So it tells you where it is, it tells you what the issue is. And these kinds of traceback error reports will actually be very helpful for your programming in Python, okay? So if you ever get an error in your Python programs, when you run them, don't freak out. Just try and read it to the best of your ability, because a lot of the time they'll actually tell you what the problem is and where the problem is, which is very, very helpful. So this one's very self-explanatory. It says list index, again, the index is the position, is out of range, meaning that there is no index of that number. So the last index of this list that you can access is 3 because there's only 4 elements and it starts at 0. Boom, there we go, we get Billy Bob. Another way you can access a list is actually with negative numbers, which is something unique to Python. We're not unique, but something not often found in other major languages that I've seen at least, okay? So we can do print, and if we do my favorite names, -1 is the index. This will actually reference the last element in the list. So if you want a quick and easy way to get the last element, you can just do -1. All right, so if we run this, we should get Billy Bob. We get Billy Bob, great. So we do print my favorite names -2, this will just be the second to last one, and so on. So -3, and then -1, okay? Or not -1, but -4, you get what I mean. So print my favorite names, -3, and print my favorite names, -4. Perfect. Now we get Billy Bob, Bob, Billy, and Randy. Now let's see how we can add values to this list if we want to. So this will be with the append function, so you're adding to something. So my favorite names, dot, and then you have all these functions here you can call upon the list because it's a list, all right? So even though this variable is just a variable that can store strings, numbers, floats, integers, and lists, because it's a list specifically, you can run functions that work with lists. So you can do my favorite names dot append, and then inside of these parentheses here, because it's a function, functions have parentheses, you can put the thing that you want to add to your list, okay? So let's say we want to add a new name. Let's call it Randy 2.0. Now, when we run this function, when it comes to this line and runs it, it'll add to this list that we already have. So if you print it out, we should have an updated list. So my favorite names, and we should get Randy, Billy Bob, and Randy 2.0. So let's run this, and we get perfect. We get Randy, Billy Bob, and Randy 2.0. Let's add some values to our empty list that we had before. So let's get rid of this one and do empty list is equal to, and then an empty list. There we go. And now if we want to add to that, we can do empty list dot append, and we can append stuff to it. So let's do Randy empty list dot append Billy, and then empty list dot append Bob. Obviously, I'm very creative with our names here, but you get the point. So let's print this out now, and we should get a 3-element list with Randy, Billy, and Bob in that order. There we go. So we get Randy, Billy, and Bob. Now, you may have noticed that when you call the append function, it's always going to add it to the end of the list. So that's why when we do it in this order, it'll always be Randy, Billy, and Bob. That's the order that it will always be, unless we switch up the order in which we call these functions here. So now it would be Randy, Bob, and Billy. There we go. If we want to insert the value at a specific index in the list, then we can call the insert function. So insert function. Now to call this function, we could do empty list dot, and then we can select it if we want to and do tab to autocomplete it. And then for this one, you're not going to provide one single argument or parameter to this function here. You're not going to put one single thing between the parentheses. You're going to put two things. First, you're going to put the index at which you want to insert the elements, so 0, so the first one, because it's empty. And then now after that, you put a comma. And then after that, you put the second argument, which is going to be the value that you want to insert into the list. So this one will put Randy, okay? So now when we print out empty list, we should get a list with one element, which is Randy. Boom, there we go. Now we can insert more if we want to, so empty list dot insert. And then we can do 1 for the second one. That'll be, let's do Joe. And then empty list dot insert. We'll do one more, insert 2, we'll say Mama. Now if we print this out, we should get a list with 3 elements, Randy, Joe, and Mama in that order. Perfect. But a lot of the time, you're not going to be doing it like this exactly, because why would you do it like this if you have the append function anyway? You don't need to specify the index every time. So the reason that you usually want to use the insert function is when you already have a list with values in it, and you want to insert it in a specific place. Like for example, if we want to insert it into the middle of the list, then it's going to shift the other elements over. Okay, so let me give you an example. We know that the list has the value of Randy, Joe, and Mama. If we want to insert a new thing into it, let's say we want to do empty list.insert, and we want to insert at 1, the index of 1, and the value we want to put into the index of 1 is Billy Bob. We know that 1 is already occupied with Joe, right? So essentially what this will do is it's going to put Billy Bob in the index of 1, and then it's going to shift everything over to the right. Everything before this index will still stay on the left, like Randy, for example. It will still stay in its place of 0 because it's not conflicting with the insertion that you're doing. But anything that was previously at that index and anything that comes after, it will be shifted one index over, okay? So if we print this out, print empty list, we should get Randy, Billy Bob, Joe, and Mama in that order. There we go, Randy, Billy Bob, Joe, and Mama. So originally the index of Randy was 0, the index of Joe was 1, the index of Mama was 2, and now Randy's index is 0, which is the same. Billy Bob's index is 1 because that's where we inserted it, and then Joe's going to be 2 because they were shifted over, and then Mama is going to be 3 because they were shifted over. So just know when you do an insertion at a place that is not the end of the list, then everything is going to be shifted over if it's at that index or after that index, okay? Which really makes sense if you think about it. Now, if we decide that, for example, we don't want to have Billy Bob in our list anymore, we can go ahead and remove it with the remove function. All right, so we can do empty list dot remove parentheses, and then in the parentheses, you're going to pass in the argument or a value of the thing that you want to remove from the list. So if you want to remove Billy Bob, you can just pass in Billy Bob. And what this will do behind the scenes, it'll go through your list and try and find the value of Billy Bob and then remove it from your list, okay? So we print this out. We should get the original list now with everything back in its original position because Billy Bob was removed. There we go. So we get Randy, Joe, and Mama. So since Billy Bob was removed from the list, there is now an empty spot and everything will be shifted back to the left, okay? Just to account for that empty spot being there. So it's going to basically go back to its original position in this case. And of course, if you provide a value that is not currently present within the list, then you'll get an exception. So it says traceback, most recent call last, blah, 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 the file that it occurred at, and then the line that it occurred at, so line 16 right here, because it says like 16 right here, of course. And then the error itself is called a value error, and it says list.remove x, and then it says x is not in the list. So x is just referring to the thing that you put in the parentheses. So since Bob was not in our list, we got an exception because it's not our list, all right? So you have to be very careful in that circumstance to make sure that you pass in values to remove function that actually exist. So you can't remove something that does not exist. That makes pretty much good sense. And of course, in Python, there's many ways to do things. So another way you can remove something from a list is to use the pop function. So the pop function actually has two ways that it can be used. So if you just do empty list.pop and then put empty parentheses, what this will do is just it'll pop or remove the last element from the list. So if we print out the empty list now, the name doesn't really make sense, right? Because it's not so empty anymore, right? But you get the point. So if we run this, we should get, there we go, we get Randy and Joe. So before we called the pop function, when we printed it out, we can see that the list has the value of Randy, Joe, and Mama. Then when we call pop, because we didn't provide anything in the parentheses, it's going to pop the last element. So now we just get Randy and Joe, okay? So that's called popping. That's actually another common terminology used in computer science that you might see in the future. Now, if you want to remove a specific element from your list, you can pass in a number to your pop function, which represents the index that you want to remove the element at, okay? So if you want to remove, for example, Joe, which is the middle element, we would put 1, right? Because 0, 1, 2. So now when we print out the list at this point, we should get Randy and Mama. And we do, perfect. So Randy and Mama, because we popped index 1, which was Joe, and then it shifts everything to the left that's on the right, because now there's an empty space where Joe was, okay? Another function you can use is the clear function, and you may be able to guess what this one does. Empty list.clear, and then we'll call print empty list. And what this will do is actually just empty your entire list. So it's going to clear it, okay? Simple enough and self-explanatory. Another way you can achieve that is actually just by you can reassign the empty list variable. So empty list is going to be equal to an empty list. So in this case, you're just providing the brackets with nothing inside of it. So it's doing the same thing, it's clearing it. So let's get rid of this, remove this, put it here. And now you should get an empty list printed out. Perfect, there you go. So there we're just using a technique that we already learned about, which is variable reassignment. Pretty cool, right? Okay, one more thing I want to teach you about today is using the extend function, the very last function I want to teach you about. And for the extend function, this allows you to add multiple elements to the end of your list if you want to. Because currently we have the append function, we have the insertion function, but they only accept one element at a time, or one value at a time that we're going to insert into our list, okay? So if we want to add multiple values at once in one line, we can do that. So we can do empty list.extend, and then in these parentheses, you're going to provide a list with values that you want to be added onto the end of the list. So we can do, let's say for example, we want to add numbers, right? Because like I said before, your list can have values of different types. So currently it has strings in it, but let's add some numbers onto it. So we can do extend 1, 5, and then 3. So if we print out empty list now, we should get Bob, Joe, Billy, 1, 5, 3. Boom, there we go. So this syntax here, or this code here, may look a little strange, but essentially you're just providing a list without a variable. So if you want to, you could really just put that into a variable. You can say new values is equal to this, and you could just pass in new values. Because essentially it's asking for a list, right? So you don't have to put like an actual list without a variable. You could put the variable itself. That's up to you how you want to do it. And that's very similar to the situation where we use the print function, right? In our print function, we don't have to put, 1 plus 1 if we don't want to. First, we could calculate it. Calculation is equal to 1 plus 1, and then put calculation inside the print function, because the print function will accept a number, right? So this means that you can pass in anything that gives you a number. So in this case, a variable stores a number, so you can pass in a variable if you want to. Same thing up here. You can pass in a variable storing a list if you want to, or you can just pass in the literal list itself. Okay? So that's the extend function. That's how you can add multiple values to the end of your list. Okay, guys, that's it for this episode. Now you know how to do lists in Python. A lot of different operations I showed you, a lot of different functions you can call upon your lists. It may be a little overwhelming, but the more that you practice, the more that you make programs using lists and call those functions, the more you'll remember it. So don't get overwhelmed. And of course, I'll leave the code for this episode so you can reference it, you can bookmark it and come back to it later on if you forget any of the functions that I've taught you, okay? So you know how to create lists, you know how to create empty lists, you know how to print them out to visualize what's inside of the lists. You know how to access a list, and you know that lists are 0 based, so it starts at 0, not 1. You know how to add to a list using the append function. You know how to add to a list using the insert function. You know how to remove from a list. You know how to pop from a list. You know how to clear a list. And now you know how to extend from a list. All right? A lot of stuff. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode, and thanks for watching. All right, so that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. In the description below, I'll leave a link to the code for this episode so you can check it out. You can bookmark it, come back to it later. If you forget any concepts or you just want to review the concepts I taught in this video, I'll mark everything up with comments so you can come back and read the code without having to rewatch the video. Although your reviews are greatly appreciated. So yeah, I'll leave a link for that in the description below, so make sure to check it out. And another thing is I'll leave a link to our Discord server. It's a big community for programmers, so you can ask for help on your programming projects if you're stuck on something, or maybe you can get some new friends. If you don't have any friends, there's lots of people here. It's growing really fast. You can find lots of people who are passionate about the same things as you. For example, if you like Minecraft Spigot development, you can find lots of people who like that. If you like C++, if you like Java, if you like web development, it's a really, really big programming community. So feel free to join. There's a link for that in the description below. And the last thing I want to tell you is that if you want to support this channel, you can click the join button below this video, and you can join this channel as a member for as low as 99 cents a month, and you can cancel at any time. You get some cool perks like early access to all of my new videos, a cool rank on my Discord server like you see right here on the side, YouTube members, and also you get to see yourself on the screen like you see right now. So if that sounds cool to you, feel free to join. If you don't want to, that's fine. If you can't, that's okay too. I really just appreciate you watching the video anyway. And thank you. Thanks a lot. And that's it. So if you like this video, leave a like. If you want to see more, subscribe. And peace.